The summer of 1995 will forever be etched in my memory, not because of what we gained, but because of what we lost at my father, an archaeologist with the Indian government, had just been posted to a remote Himalayan village named Keshpur, nestled deep in the Khmeon Hills. It was not even on most maps. No phone lines, no schools, just an abandoned outpost with barely 50 scattered homes and one road that disappeared into the forest like a vanishing ribbon. When we first arrived, my father, mother, and I remember being oddly excited. I was 14, curious, and romantic about village life. The thought of staying in an old house surrounded by mist and pine. Trees sounded like an adventure, but the villagers did not greet us with warmth. They were polite, yes, but fearful. They avoided eye contact and whispered among themselves as we passed. The only time their expressions changed was when my father mentioned the temple. There's an old stone structure beyond the eastern woods. He told the village. Head looks ancient, unmarked, no known records. I want to study it. The elder's eyes went wide, not with surprise, but dread. That place is not to be touched, he whispered. My father chuckled. Superstitions don't scare me, sir. I deal in facts. But the man didn't laugh. He leaned in slowly. Some doors remain closed for a reason. That temple holds what should never be awakened. That night, as the lantern light flickered in our creaky wooden house, I heard my parents argue. My mother was worried. She was always sensitive to things others ignored. The air in the village, the silence that blanketed it. Like dust, she said the place felt off. My father dismissed it. It's fear. These people live in fear, and fear breeds myths. The next morning, he hired 2 local boys as guides and trekked into the forest. When he returned, he looked different. Pale, excited, but shaken. There are carvings older than anything I've ever seen, he said breathlessly. It's built into a cave, like an underground sanctum. No idols. Just runes, symbols, and bones. My mother gasped. Bones? Animal, probably. Can't say for sure. I need to excavate properly. That evening, as dust settled and smoke rose from kitchen fires across the valley, I stood by the window and stared at the forest. Something about the trees unsettled me. They didn't sway like other trees. They stood too still, like they were holding their breath. The house, our house, was a 2-story colonial relic, built by the British during their rule. It had wooden floors that creaked even when no one walked on them. A grand staircase curved through the middle, leading to 3 bedrooms upstairs. The back door opened into a fading orchard that led straight into the woods, the villagers said. The house had been abandoned for decades, ever since the last occupant, a British officer, was found hanging from the rafters. No one knew why. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind. But there was no breeze. The trees outside didn't move. The whispers were soft, rhythmic, like chanting, in a tongue I didn't understand. It came from behind the orchard, from the forest, from the direction of the temple. The temple the next day. My father brought me along to the site. The path was narrow, flanked by ferns and thick roots. Birds chirped once or twice, then fell silent. As we neared the stone structure, and then I saw it, the temple. It wasn't like any temple I'd seen before. It had no dome, no idols, no sanctum. It was just a broken archway leading into a moss-covered chamber built into a slope. Faint red stains, faded but unmistakably blood-like, marked the threshold. My father was euphoric. Vedic architecture, he murmured, could be over 3,000 years old. This could rewrite what we know of Himalayan civilizations. But I wasn't listening. I felt something, a pressure, like we were being watched. Not by an animal, not by a person, but by the stones themselves. The temple seemed to breathe, its silence too heavy to be natural. Inside, the air was thick. Dust swirled like mist. At the center was a stone altar, and carved into it, in sharp, deep gouges, was a spiral, bleeding outward like a wound. Beautiful, isn't it? My father said. I nodded, but a chill crawled down my spine. From the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a shape, a white blur, just outside the entrance. When I turned, nothing, but I knew what I saw. The footprints. That night, I woke to a creaking sound outside my room. The corridor was dark. Our generator was off. As I stepped out, I felt something cold on the floor. Wet footprints, trailing from the main door. To my room, I followed them slowly, my heart pounding. They stopped at my bedside, but the door was bolted from the inside. The next morning, I told my parents. My mother believed me instantly. She looked terrified. My father frowned. You're dreaming, nothing more. But the prints were real. My mother had seen them. She didn't say anything to him, but she started keeping a lamp lit in our room at night. And I noticed she began sleeping with a pendant clutched in her palm, the kind people wear for protection. The dream 3 nights later, I saw her, a woman, pale, wrapped in white, hair covering her face, standing inside the temple. She didn't speak, but I felt her pain, so raw. It broke through the dream and followed me into wakefulness. When I jolted up, my hands were ice cold, and the same whispering, that dreadful chant, echoed from the forest again. Asterisk. The next morning, I tried to tell my father about the woman in my dream, how vivid it was, how it felt more like a memory than imagination. But he was too absorbed in his research. Dreams reflect our fears, nothing more, he said, brushing away my concerns. You're reading too much into this. Maybe stay away from the temple for now. But I didn't want to go back anyway. That place had planted something inside me, a seed of fear that was beginning to take root. And it wasn't just the dream. There was something else. The woman. I couldn't forget her posture. Bent slightly forward, hair wet, dripping as if she had just emerged from a river. Her arms were long, hanging unnaturally low. And her presence. It wasn't just frightening. It was sorrowful. She wasn't haunting me. She was begging me. The villagers warning later that afternoon, I walked down to the edge of the village to buy some bread. An old woman, wrinkled and blind in one eye, was sitting outside her hut stringing garlic. She stared at me for a long time. Then, as I passed, she hissed, "Your blood is too loud." She hears it. I stopped. What did you say? She was buried under stone, sealed in dark. You disturbed her breath, the woman muttered, her head nodding like she was in a trance. Now she will wake, and she will remember. I ran all the way home. A manuscript in the wall that evening. My father made a discovery. As he was inspecting the far corner of the temple's altar chamber, he noticed a section of the wall that sounded hollow. With a chisel and hammer, he carefully removed a layer of stone. Behind it was a cavity, and inside that cavity was a bundle wrapped in decayed cloth. A manuscript, written in an old dialect of Sanskrit and Tibetan. It's a ritual record. He told us over dinner, excited like a child with a new toy. A record of a ceremony, but the writing is strange. It talks about binding the mother of silence. That phrase repeats several times. My mother paled. Mother of silence. Could be a title, he said, or a metaphor. But her eyes were fixed on the window, where the forest waited. Like a shadow. The whispers get louder that night. I heard the chanting again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was inside the house. I sat up in bed, frozen. The lamp beside me flickered wildly. The air turned icy. The walls of my room seemed to pulse with breath. I heard footsteps, soft, wet, dragging footsteps. Walking past my door, I couldn't move, couldn't scream. A voice whispered my name, not loud, not angry, but broken, like it had forgotten how to speak. Arjun. My name, whispered in the same voice as in the dream, and then silence. The next morning, my mother found a lock of black hair under my bed. It wasn't mine. Who was she? My mother had had enough. She went to the village head herself. After a long silence, he finally spoke. She was not human anymore when they sealed her. Long ago, she was a woman of this village, wronged, betrayed, buried alive beneath the temple by men who feared her. Her grief was too loud. Her scream cracked the stone. Her soul never passed, and now, my mother asked, she's awake. Again, because your husband broke the stone. The diary of the dead girl. The next day, my father returned to the temple and dug deeper behind the wall. He found something else. A small box made of bone. Inside was a cloth-wrapped diary, brittle and faded. He translated parts of it for us that night. The girl's name was Devika. She had fallen in love with a priest's son. When she became pregnant, the priest declared her a witch, accusing her of seducing his boy with forbidden rituals. The villagers, afraid of divine wrath, sentenced her to be sealed inside the temple as a living sacrifice to cleanse the land. Her last diary entry was chilling. They came in white robes and sealed me beneath cold stone. I screamed, but the gods were silent. My womb became a tomb. My sorrow eternal. I remember my mother sobbing quietly that night. My father sat still, staring at the flame of the lantern. He had opened her prison. The night of the storm, that night, it rained. For the first time in weeks, a violent storm cracked through the village, lightning setting trees ablaze, winds howling like wolves. And in the chaos, she came inside. I saw her standing at the foot of my bed. Her face was finally visible, eyes hollow, black, filled with centuries of pain. Her mouth moved without sound. Her fingers trembled. She pointed toward the forest. And then she screamed, but it wasn't a sound. It was a force. A wave of despair that knocked the lamp to the floor and shattered every mirror in the house. When I woke, it was morning. The house was destroyed, windows broken. Wooden beams snapped like matchsticks. My father was gone. Asterisk. My father was gone. The villagers came to help clear the debris from our shattered house. No one could explain how the storm had only destroyed our home while leaving the rest of the village untouched. And no one could explain how my father had vanished without a trace. His shoes still lay by the door. His jacket still hung on the back of his chair. But he was nowhere, like the storm had plucked him from the world. My mother didn't cry. She sat in silence, rocking gently, her eyes locked on the single scorched footprint that remained in the hallway. It was bare, burned into the wooden floor, a woman's foot. Slender, black. The smell of whetstone and burnt flowers lingered for days. Voices in the well days passed, maybe weeks. Time began to warp. At night, the whispers returned, not just in dreams, but in waking moments. I'd hear them in the trees, in the creaking of the floorboards. Even in the silence of noon. One evening, I went to fetch water from the old village well. As I dropped the bucket in, I heard it. A voice echoing from the depths. Arjun. I froze. The bucket hit water, but the sound wasn't a splash. It was a sob, deep aching, like someone weeping from the bottom of the earth. I pulled the rope up. The bucket was empty, but wrapped around the handle was a piece of cloth. Blood-stained. The woman in the field. I stopped going out alone. The villagers began avoiding me, eyes filled with pity or fear. Only the old blind woman still spoke. She's marked you, she said. You looked into her eyes. She cannot unsee you now. What does she want from me? I asked. She smiled with her broken teeth. She wants you to remember. That night, I had another vision. Not a dream. more like reliving someone else's. Agony, I was in a field, a wide open one surrounded by torches, men in white chanting, dragging a girl. Her long hair flew wild behind her. Her belly swollen, she screamed and pleaded, "No, the child is innocent. He is yours. You said you loved me." But they threw her to the ground. A priest held a scroll and read a curse aloud. The words were ancient, burning into the air. They pinned her down, gagged her, and chanted faster. A pit was opened beneath a shrine, and they lowered her into it alive, buried, sealed, forgotten. I woke up soaked in sweat, screaming, and I remembered her name now. Devika. The journal that wrote itself after. The dream, I opened my father's journal. I don't know why, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of instinct, but something had changed. New entries had appeared. They were written as handwriting, but they weren't his words. They were hers. I carried your son. He kicked us. They sealed me. My womb became stone. My tears drowned the air. I have waited. I have watched. I have remembered every face. Another entry. You broke the seal. You woke me. You opened the silence. Now let the silence speak. The final entry was a map, a drawing of the temple, with a hidden chamber marked beneath the altar. A second chamber, return to the temple, my. Mother begged me not to go back, but I had to. I couldn't run anymore. I needed to know what lay beneath. Who or what had taken my father? I returned to the temple before sunrise, carrying a lantern, a rope, and the journal. The altar was cracked now, a hairline fracture splitting it down the middle. I followed the map, pushing aside moss and stone. After hours of searching, I found it, a narrow passage behind the wall, barely wide enough to crawl through. It reeked of damp earth and incense, long extinguished. As I descended, the air grew colder. The silence became deafening. And then I found it. A chamber of bones. The tomb of the forgotten. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with ancient scripts, most of them scratched out violently. The floor was covered in broken idols, wilted marigolds, and hundreds of bones, not just human, but animals too. As if offerings had been made here long after she was buried. In the center stood a blackened sarcophagus, but the lid was open, empty. Single object lay inside, a pendant. Old, rusted, shaped like a coiled snake with wings. I reached for it. And heard a breath behind me. Turned. She was there. Devika. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination. Real. Her skin was gray, stretched like paper. Her hair hung in clumps. Her eyes, those hollow, endless eyes, locked on mine. You saw me, she whispered. You remembered. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. You carry his blood and mine, my child. You are the bridge. Then she smiled, and the chamber shook. The walls began to close in. Ran. The walls trembled around me as the chamber collapsed, stones crashing, earth groaning like something ancient had awakened from its eternal slumber. Devika's voice echoed in my skull, louder than thunder, softer than breath. You carry both sins, and salvation. The pendant clutched in my hand burned hot, branding my palm. I didn't remember grabbing it. I didn't remember climbing. I just remember the shriek that followed me out of the tunnel, something not quite human, something old. I burst into the temple above, gasping for air. Morning light cut through the cracked roof. For a moment, it felt like I had escaped, but I hadn't. A village in mourning. When I returned, I found the village cloaked in a strange hush. No birds sang, no dogs barked, no bells rang. It felt like the world was holding its breath. My mother stood at the gate, eyes wild, mouth trembling. Where were you? She whispered. Before I could answer, she pointed behind me. Smoke rising from the east. The Sharma household. 3 generations, had burned to the ground overnight. No one heard screams, no one saw flames, but only ash remained. And on the front wall, drawn in soot, was a single word: remember. The pendant's power. I sat alone in my room that night, staring at the pendant. It pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. When I held it up to my ear, I could hear faint sounds, sobbing, chanting, digging. Then a whisper: free him. Was it my father? Was it her child? Suddenly, my mind filled with images, not dreams, but memories not my own. A baby born beneath torchlight. Devika cradling him, humming a lullaby. The priest tearing him away, locking him in another chamber. Devika's screams echoing forever. There were 2 tombs, one for her, one for the child, and I had only opened one. The second chamber, the journal. Didn't mention it. The villagers never spoke of it, but the visions wouldn't stop. Every night, the child's cries grew louder. The pendant grew hotter. My sleep bled into waking nightmares. I knew what I had to do. I returned to the temple one last time. This time, I brought tools: rope, lantern, spade. My hands trembled, but my resolve didn't. I followed the cries, not with my ears, but with my bones, as if something inside me was being pulled toward him. Beneath the temple's western wall, covered by centuries of rubble and roots, I found it, a hollow sound beneath the stone. I dug for hours, until I found a small sealed door, not carved like the others, forged shut with iron and bone. The child. In the dark, the chamber was colder than death. I stepped down, the light barely illuminating the space. Unlike Devika's tomb, this one was untouched, not defiled, not worshipped, just abandoned. And in the center, chained, curled, silent, lay a child's skeleton. Tiny, shackled by wrists and ankles, still dressed in a ceremonial cloth. Faded crown rested nearby. He had never been given a name. I fell to my knees. I didn't know what to say. What could I possibly offer a soul denied life, love, and light? So I wept. And my tears fell onto his bones. The pendant burned in my chest. Resurrection, the chamber shook. Darkness coiled like smoke around the walls. The bones rattled. Then they rose, not into a body, but into a shape. Tall, shimmering, flickering between child and demon, grief and fury. The air screamed around me. My lantern shattered. The spirit stared at me. No eyes, only endless voids. Then a voice, young and ancient, cracked the silence. You came for me. I nodded, unable to speak. She called you. You answered. Now, we are one. I felt it, a surge of power, of memory, of rage. Something entered me, a storm of pain, birth, betrayal, and blood. I collapsed. And in the darkness, I heard Devika's voice again. My son returns. Let the silence end. The village trembles. I awoke in my bed, got my mother asleep beside me, clutching my hand. Had it all been a dream? But when I stood, the pendant glowed against my chest. My palm bore the mark, a snake coiled around a flame. Outside, the village was no longer silent. They were screaming. One by one, the houses fell to fire, wind, water. Earth split beneath the shrine. Trees twisted like serpents. The skies bled red. Devika had returned, and she brought justice. But it wasn't rage that fueled her. It was sorrow. A choice in the fire. The village elders gathered in the square, begging the gods, throwing offerings into the flames. They blamed me. They blamed my father, but none could undo what had been awakened. I climbed the hill, pendant in hand, journal in my satchel. I stood before the ruined temple, now split in 2. Behind me, the villagers watched in terror. Ahead of me, in the flames, stood Devika. She wasn't monstrous now. She was whole, beautiful, tragic, mother. Beside her stood the spirit of her child. Both looked at me. And Devika spoke. You carry our pain. but you also carry our hope. Choose vengeance or peace. Devika's words echoed in the fiery winds. You carry our pain, but you also carry our hope. Choose vengeance or peace. My heart thundered in my chest. Behind me, the villagers cried and clung to each other, their faces lit by temple flames and terror. Ahead, Devika and her son stood like shadows stitched from sorrow and fire. Watching me, I stepped forward. The pendant around my neck pulsed like a heartbeat, not mine but theirs. The child's soul stirred inside me. I could feel his memories flicker of being torn from his mother, buried in the dark, forgotten. I dropped to my knees, not from fear, but from understanding. The offering of blood, I pulled the ancient journal from my bag and tossed it into the fire. The wind roared, the flames surged higher, words that had cursed my family. The words of the priests who betrayed Devika turned to ash, but it wasn't enough. Devika's gaze remained steady. Her child's eyes, hollow and endless, bore into my soul. The curse is blood-bound, she said. It began with betrayal. It ends with sacrifice. I knew then she didn't want revenge. She wanted rest. For herself, for her son, for the land that suffered with them. But that rest demanded a final price. The weight of the past. The ground cracked under my knees. A voice whispered in the wind, my father's, don't let them take you. I saw his face in my mind, proud, broken, guilty. He had opened the first tomb, and I had opened the second. Together, we had awakened a curse sealed by blood centuries ago. I turned back to the villagers. Some wept, some prayed, but none stepped forward. None accepted blame. None offered peace. It was up to me. I looked at Devika. What must I do? I asked. My voice shaking, she stepped forward, her form flickering like a candle on its final breath, become the bridge between the living and the dead. The ritual begins. The winds died, the fire dimmed. Devika raised her hand and it appeared. A blade, black as coal. Old as grief, she didn't move toward me. Instead, she offered it. I understood. This was my choice, not hers. Not the curse single quotes as mine. I took the blade. The handle pulsed warm. It recognized the blood in my veins, the same blood that once ran through priests who had buried her alive. I closed my eyes and whispered, let this end. With one swift motion, I slashed my palm. The blood fell onto the earth, and the temple roared. The breaking of the curse, the ground split, the sky screamed, but then silence, a stillness like none I had ever known. Devika stepped back, her eyes filled not with rage, but tears. Her child floated beside her, no longer hollow, but glowing with light. With peace, the pendant shattered. The curse was broken, and as they turned to fade into the air, into the stars, Devika looked at me one last time. Tell them the truth. That love buried can still rise again. And just like that, she was gone. Village awakens, the fire vanished. The sky cleared. The ground healed. The temple, once broken, now stood whole, though no longer cursed. It was quiet, peaceful. The villagers approached me slowly, uncertain, reverent. They saw the blood on my hand. They saw the empty space where Devika had stood, and they understood. For the first time in generations, silence did not mean fear. It meant peace. Years later, the village has changed. We rebuilt not just the temple, but the story. The true story. Devika is no longer called witch or curse. She is honored as protector, as mother, as martyr. Every year, on the night of her death, we light candles by the temple steps. We tell the story of her sacrifice, of her son, of what hate can bury, and what love can still heal. As for me, I still bear the scar on my hand. Some nights, I feel a warmth in my chest, like a heartbeat not my own, and I smile because I know they are watching, not in anger, but in peace.